Okay, so the Chicago Bears are one of the oldest franchises in NFL history with a beautifully rich history, right? Well, it's complicated, okay? The Bears have their moments for sure. 2006, 2018, 1985. These were all amazing teams, but time and time again, the Chicago Bears suffer from the same two issues: inconsistency and awful quarterback play. But why is that? To answer that question, you can see the like of the video, right? It's not going to be a simple answer. And I can't cover a 100-year-old franchise in anything under an hour, so sit back and let's do this thing. Get ready to learn all there is to learn about the most miserable franchise in sports, why their quarterbacks always blow ass, why they've wasted so much talent, and in the current day, maybe, just maybe, the Bears have finally stopped their own endless cycle of torment. Alright, so meet the main character of this video, George Halas, a man who, at the very least, I'm sure you've heard of before, and he's basically the entire Chicago Bears. In 1920, a starch company decided to sponsor a football team, and after George Halas, who also played for the Bears, paid a grand total of 100 buckaroos, the Chicago Bears were born. And in their first ever game, the Chicago Bears, at the time, the Decatur Staleys, beat the Moline Tractors 20-0, and I remember that game like it was yesterday. Then, slowly over time, as a whole, football began to gain a little bit more popularity. It was nothing crazy yet, but in 1926, when the Bears signed Red Grange to a $100,000 contract, which was enormous back then, with a superstar on the roster, the Bears became the model football franchise, and that only became more and more true after this absolute Chad joined the squad in 1930. Meet the 6'2", 230-pound back by the name of Bronco Nagurski, a guy who was nothing short of an anomaly for his era. Dude was a ball of muscle, and words can't describe how terrifying he could have been in the current era with modern technologies, but during his time, it was just pure domination. I mean, his name was Bronco Nagurski. That just sounds like a guy who can crack your skull in half with his thighs alone, and that's pretty much what he did to the NFL, leading the Bears to their first ever championships in 1932 and 1933. And look, I'm not trying to discredit these chips, okay? You play who's in front of you, and the goal of the game is still the same even to this day, but I mean, come on now. The Bears quarterback in 1932 was Keith Molesworth, who threw for 346 yards and 3 touchdowns the whole season. And his main receiver was a guy who didn't even play with a helmet on. So, I mean, it was just a completely different game back then. But that didn't change the fact that the Bears were still just killing everyone, and George Halas was the guy in the center of the butcherings. His innovation to the game of football is difficult to really put into words here, but just know there are so many things that he invented back then that we take for granted nowadays. For example, the T formation, which, although he didn't technically invent, it was greatly refined by George Halas. The quarterbacks reading defensive signals in general, also George Halas, signal calls, the motion offense, and so much more are all attributed way back to George Halas. And not only that, but the old man liked to do a little bit of trolling on the side too. You know how all these offensive and defensive coordinators are watching the game from box seats now? Well, that's one more thing that George is credited with inventing. But after the rest of the league caught on to this, George did everything he could to fuck with the opposing teams, strategically placing the team band right next to the other team's eye in the sky man, so whenever he picked up the phone to make a call to the head coach, George would just have the band ear rape them right as they picked up the phone to make sure nobody could hear anything. The guy played dirty, no doubt about that. There are also rumors that Halas had a timeout dog that he trained to run onto the field whenever he needed a free timeout, so, you know, do with that what you will. And all these revolutionary concepts just kept leading to more and more success. Halas and the Bears held the crown, and the rest of the league was just playing catch-up. And after the Bears drafted quarterback Sid Luckman second overall, things just got even uglier for the rest of the league. Now, Sid Luckman, like George Halas, is a name that you've probably heard before as well. You may not realize it, but sometime in your life, I'm sure you've come around a TikTok or two saying the Bears haven't had a great quarterback since Hitler was alive, and, well, yeah, but the guy those shitposts are referring to is Sid Luckman, and he was, and still is to this very moment in time, the best Bears quarterback that they've ever had. And after a shaky rookie year in 1939, once again 85 years ago, in his second year in the league, Luckman really got Halas' system down, and utilizing the T formation, some elements of the motion offense, and a new crazy idea called the drop back pass, the Bears once again found themselves in the championship game against Washington, and It didn't go well for one team, let's just say that. At the time, the good old Skins were owned by George Marshall, who I'll just say is most definitely a worse person than Dan Schneider is, and before the big game, Marshall called his good friend George Halas a crybaby. Yeah, you heard me right. He called him a pissy little fit-throwing crybaby. Yeah, you really should. You know that feeling of getting a little overconfident and saying some shit you definitely should not say in front of the last person who should hear what you just said? Well, this isn't that, okay? This is the most devastating, demoralizing, soul-depriving loss in the history of sports. 73 points to 0. Could you imagine? All it took was for George Halas to call Marshall gay, and the Bears went out there and cooked up this masterpiece. I mean, shit. Look at that hit. That had to be personal. And the roster was pretty star-studded too for the Bears. They had Sid Luckman, they had Bulldog Turner, George McAfee, young Bussy? All right, if you say so, George. But the Bears were good, is what I'm trying to say, as they won chips again in 41 and 43, and that 43 championship in particular was just, I couldn't believe what I was seeing when I saw the highlights. This was the deciding play in the championship game, okay? Listen up. Sammy Baugh, Washington's quarterback, punted the ball to Sid Luckman, the Bears quarterback, who trucked Baugh on the return and knocked him out for most of the game. What the fuck? Let me try to make that a little bit more clear. Imagine for a second that presented to you by your worst sleep paralysis demon moment, you are viewing Lamar Jackson punting the ball to Patrick Mahomes, who runs him over and knocks him out to win the game. Because that's basically what happened, as Luckman also played a perfect game through the air, throwing for 300 yards, 5 touchdowns, and had 2 picks. On defense, of course. So I don't know what to tell you anymore. The 1930s for the Bears were a dominant period, to say the least, and it seemed like the Bears were going to keep doing this forever. As time would go on, Halas and the city of Chicago would only rack up more and more rings. It's just there was one little issue. World War II kind of happened, and not only did they lose a ton of players to the war, but Halas himself went back to the Navy as a lieutenant commander. And by the time most of the crew came back, including Papa Bear, the Bears actually did pick up right where they left off, taking home another piece of gold in 46. However, at that point, the fuel was low, but the big black Dodge Ram 1500 just kept chugging along. And by the end of the 40s decade, the Bears dynasty was over, with Sid Luckman calling it a career in 1950. But this is where things truly begin, where the quarterback curse for the Chicago Bears all started, because right after Luckman checked out, the keys to the most respected franchise in football were handed to a superstar QB from Notre Dame by the name of Johnny Lujack to become the next Bears all-time great quarterback in what will just surely be a very successful and rich continuous history at the position. And well, right away, Johnny was looking amazing. In 1949, Lujack threw for almost 2,700 yards in a season, which, is absolutely nothing for today's standards. But back then, that was good enough for the 3rd most ever in a season. And after 2 straight Pro Bowl selections and an all-pro team, Johnny was here to save Bears fans from a potential timeline of constant day drinking. And then he got hurt. Yeah, chances are you've never heard of this guy for a reason, and that reason is the football gods just fucking hate Bears fans with an immoral passion. And after he got injured in 1951, at the age of 26, he never played again and started running a car dealership, which is not exactly what you want to see your potential franchise quarterback doing. And honestly, with the falling out Halas had with Lujack, as well as the injury that contributed to Johnny Lujack's potential Hall of Fame career being ruined, I believe, personally, that this birthed the curse of Johnny Lujack, where from now on, all Bears quarterbacks, no matter how good or bad, are inevitably going to suffer an injury at the absolute worst time possible in the biggest games. And hey, if you don't believe in this curse now, I don't blame you, because I don't think I've ever heard it mentioned ever, but throughout this video, when we go over the eerie amount of just horribly timed injuries, maybe you'll be convinced. Anyways, as the 1950s faded into the 60s, the Bears got boring to watch and didn't win anything at all. But during this time period, and especially when they were winning championships, the Bears developed a culture, an identity that still sticks with them today, and that identity was having a tough, raw, hard-hitting defense that dictated the flow of games, followed by a bruising running back that hit defenders harder than they could hit back, and in 1961, the Bears drafted another piece that would help them get a part of that identity back, and a guy who will turn out to be a pretty important protagonist by the name of Mike Ditka. Ditka was a good player, a very, very good player, but the reason he's so important to this video isn't for his 6 seasons of tight end play in the Bears or for how he revolutionized the position itself, but it's because, well, the guy is fucking nuts. I mean, the dude punched a hole in the wall in college, broke his fist and played through it, while coaching for the Bears way later on, punched an equipment vehicle and broke his hand and coached the game anyways. Dude was tough as hell, and in terms of culture, Ditka was exactly what the Bears needed at the time and exactly what they will need later on in this video. So with Ditka's arrival in '61, 2 years later, the Bears actually did it again. They won another championship. Billy Wade was a 33-year-old quarterback who provided stable play, and the Bears defense was the best in the NFL too. Doug Atkins, Rosie Taylor, and others were amazing all-pros, but to be honest with you, this was a bit of a one-off great team and not anything close to a dynasty, because 1 year later in '64, the team fell off a cliff, and if the team were going to have any chance of not being atrocious in the years following, they were going to need a historic draft class in 1965, and they got exactly that, but Chicago bared the draft class away in the most Chicago Bears way possible. So, in 1965, the Bears' top 4 draft picks were each either Pro Bowl or All-Pros during their playing days, coming back with Dick Butkus, Gale Sayers, Jim Nance, and Steve DeLong. DeLong? Dude, these names are getting out of hand, but whatever, okay. The point being, these guys were all amazing football players, but because the merger had yet to happen, both Nance and sizable schlong Steve found themselves in the AFL, and although the Bears weren't the only team hurt by losing top draft picks to another league, they definitely may have taken the most damage overall. But that was not the only direction the Bears were getting smashed into the dirt from, because Mike Ditka, the Bears' Hall of Fame tight end, was not getting along with Papa Bear at all, and after 1966, when the notoriously cheap Hallis would not pay Ditka what he was owed, he traded Iron Mike to the Eagles for absolutely all nothing besides quarterback Jack Concannon, who was a 2-pack of ass. I'm not even joshing ya. They didn't even get a single draft pick from this trade. Hallis just woke up one day and said, "Fuck it, I'm gonna end Mike's entire career on a Wednesday afternoon," and did. And because of that petty move, the Bears began their process of wasting 2 of the best players in NFL history at their positions. I mean, Gale Sayers, if he didn't have all the injury issues he faced because Bears, he could have been the best running back in NFL history. And to this day, he may have played the best game a running back has ever played when he turned 9 carries into 113 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns. 4 on the ground, 1 in the air, and 1 on a punt return in garbage time as the Bears dropped a 60 whopper on the 49ers. But before we go any further, this video is sponsored by SeatGeek. With over 28 million downloads, SeatGeek is the #1 rated ticketing app for various events such as sports, festivals, concerts, and so much more. And with the NFL schedule out, SeatGeek is the perfect place to look for a great deal on a game. They put all the tickets across the entire web into one place and rate each ticket on a scale of 1 to 10, the best deal being green and red being the worst. And even if something does go wrong, every ticket is backed with a buyer guarantee, and SeatGeek even lets you return your ticket ahead of an event. And for me personally, I'm pretty hyped up about going to see the Raiders season opener versus the Panthers. So if you yourself are ready to go to an NFL game and just have a good time next season, use code TubFrog for $20 off of SeatGeek tickets. So once again, use code TubFrog, all caps, for $20 off your first purchase, and click the link in the description to download the app yourself to get started. But with that, let's get back to the Bears' pain. And for how great Sayers was, Butkus was honestly probably a better player. He was the linebacker everyone in the 80s and 90s modeled their game after, a massive 250-pound man, and off the field, he was a whole different person. According to his name, he was probably kissing butts and, but on the field, he was out there to do one thing: kill. And if you don't believe me and these highlights somehow aren't speaking to you, I mean, Butkus said it himself. I didn't just want to end a play. I wanted to rip their f***ing heads off. When he was in the zone, the dude belonged in one of 2 places, a psychiatric ward or a football field, and thank the Lord we got the latter. But while Sayers was breaking running back records and Butkus was biting people in pile-ups, the Chicago Bears were doing nothing but losing. I really did my best. I tried so hard to do all the research I could, reading articles, newspapers, and some dated-ass documentaries. I was really having trouble learning anything about the 1960 Bears that wasn't just only talking about either Sayers or Butkus. And sure, there were other stories like the tragedy of Brian Piccolo, but none of that explained why the team was so bad until I looked at the rosters myself, and who would have guessed it? But the quarterbacks were trash. As I said before, Jack Concannon, the man they traded for Ditka, was terrible at football, but amazing at delivering pounds of coke to undercover agents, and after him, the Bears had a guy named Bobby Douglas, who played the position like he was a running back in the Wildcat formation every single goddamn down, and all of this putrid QB play and a bad hip that didn't allow Hallis to heckle refs at every point in the game led to George stepping down from coaching before 1968, and he moved upstairs while still being pretty hands-on as an owner. Then, literally 2 years after Hallis got off the green, the Bears hit an all-time low. And a low they honestly probably never will hit again. In 1969, the Chicago Bears were absolutely terrible. Gale Sayers miraculously came back from a grisly double ligament tear in his knee to make an all-pro team and lead the league in rushing yards, but it didn't even come close to mattering. I mean, in week 2, they lost to the Cardinals by 3 off of a miscommunication by the center and quarterback, which led to a 60-yard fumble for a touchdown. And the season was completely tanked from there on out, as the Bears managed to go 1-13 on the season, winning a single game versus a Steelers team that was even worse, led by... I just can't do this anymore, man. There's no way these names are real. I wonder who their running back was, though. Anyway, the Bears were a steamy, overflowing factory of shit, but somehow, everyone knew Dick Butkus was still that guy, and although the award wasn't official yet, Butkus won the Defensive Player of the Year award in 1969 on this one-win team, and repeated again in 1970, but time and time again, the Bears just continue and will continue to get awful injury luck, as Sayers suffered another disgusting injury in 1970 that officially ended his career, and in 1973, Butkus also had to call it a career early due to a knee injury that worsened over time, as both Hall of Famers for the Bears rode off into the sunset. And the biggest tragedy of them all, neither of these two guys ever played in a single playoff game in their entire careers. Rest in peace to two legends. So the 1970s decade for the Bears was also setting up to look pretty bad, and the main reason for this is the single most unlucky event in the entire history of the Chicago Bears that I've never really heard of anyone discuss before, and for the life of me, I can't understand why. So, remember how I was talking about the 69 Bears and how Dick Butkus lost to Dick Shiner and the Steelers, or whatever? Well, that game put both teams at the 1-win mark, and because these fancy analytics for tiebreakers did exist back then, the NFL just said fuck it and had them flip a coin, and the winner would get the rights to the number 1 overall pick in the 1970 NFL Draft. And who do you fucking think won the coin toss? Well, if you answered not the Chicago Bears, I'd like to shake your hand and gladly say, you're goddamn right. Because the Steelers, after winning the coin toss, would draft the consensus number 1 quarterback in the country in Terry Bradshaw, who would go on to be a Hall of Famer and one of the leaders on arguably the greatest dynasty in NFL history. But TubFrog, you may be asking. He probably wouldn't have been as good on the Bears, so you gotta cut them some slack. And what did Chicago do with the 2nd overall pick? Because, you know, that's still a pretty high draft choice. Well, I'll tell you. It's a story of tragedy and betrayal, but after trying to shop the pick around because they knew they weren't getting Bradshaw, Hallis in the front office hit up the Packers, and after a tense negotiating process that went something like this,
and I'll give you 3 wishes.
Make it 5.
4.
3. Take it or leave it.
Okay. 3.
The Bears traded away the 2nd overall pick in the draft to Green Bay for 3 players. Leroy Caffey, who played 1 season with the team, Elijah Pitts, who played 0 seasons for the team, and Bob Hyland, who played 1 season for the team. Huh? Oh, what the fuck? Why? And this led to the 1970s decade being almost all misery at all times for Bears fans. And to spare your eyeballs from the internal flame of absolute treachery that is the 1970s Bears quarterback play, just look at this list of a majority of the quarterbacks the Bears had in the 70s decade. I mean, besides the guys I mentioned already, I doubt you've heard of any of these people, and for good reason too. They're all cheeks, and this abysmal quarterback play led to the Bears managing 2 winning seasons all decade and 2 playoff losses, both of which were carried by one man. One man who, in a vacuum, still to this day has a case to be known as the greatest player in NFL history. Yes, even over him. Now, obviously, the guy I'm talking about is Walter Payton, and upon hearing the news he was the newest member of the proudest organization in sports in Chicago, Walter Payton rationally responded by breaking down in tears, praying to God to not play in Chicago, because as we've established, yes, they were that bad. So although Walter Payton started his career out a little slow, going for a grand total of -4 yards in his first ever game, turns out he was pretty good at running forward with a brown thing in his hands. And in 1977 in particular, Walter Payton was just doing everything he could to even win the Bears a game. There was a sequence of 2 games in a row where he had one of the best runs of all time versus the Chiefs, then turned around 7 days later, and with the flu, Walter Payton casually had the greatest game a running back has ever played at the time, eclipsing Gale Sayers in the eyes of most, when he got 40 carries for 275 yards in a thrilling 10-7 victory. This was how the 1970s were for the Bears. Same as the 60s. Chicago stumbled into one all-time great player, then surrounded them with garbage pieces, garbage quarterbacks, whiffed on drafts, and made horrible moves to keep the team afloat. And in 1977, the best year of Walter's career, where he rushed for almost 2,000 yards, averaging almost 6 yards per carry and 132 yards per game, seriously, just take a minute to appreciate how amazing this man was. But like I was saying, in 1977, the Bears tried to go all in on a quarterback and traded away a first and a fourth for Browns quarterback Mike Phipps, who I don't even need to say anything about for you to know all you need to know. But with that first round pick in 1978, the Browns would go on to draft Hall of Famer Ozzie Newsome, who would go on to be one of the most important figures in NFL history, honestly. Now, although these Bears teams seemed pretty much hopeless once again, there were bright spots. Walter Payton, Gary Fenwick, Doug Plank were all great pieces, but the Bears' biggest addition in the 70s came within the coaching, as in 1978 in particular, the Bears hired the architect of the Purple People Eaters, Buddy Ryan, who will go on to become an integral part of this franchise, and the team's head coach at the time was... wait... he coached? But hold on for a second, and let's take a step back, because the Bears have still yet to win a single Super Bowl to this point, and management was not going in a positive direction either, because George Halas was getting up there in age, and when he passed away eventually, the team was going to go to the hands of George Halas Jr., also known as Muggs, but then, tragically, he passed away from a heart attack, and now, I'm not insinuating anything super sketchy was going on here to change who would get the team inherited to them, but just know that much later on, after a second autopsy report was ordered, by the time the new doctor received the body, almost all of his organs were replaced with sawdust, and in the words of the doctor himself, this was very concerning to potentially hide poisons or other drugs in his system at the time of his death. The main takeaway, though, is that with George Halas Jr.'s premature death, the heir to the Bears organization would now have to be someone else. But to step away from the ownership problems that, trust me, we will get back to, the Bears have some other things to deal with. Because after another disappointing, mediocre 6-win campaign in 1981, Halas was prepared to clean house yet again and just send everyone to the curb and try his luck at another fresh hand. But the defensive players already on the roster truly believed in Buddy Ryan to be able to take the Bears to a whole nother level defensively, and ended up writing a letter to George Halas himself begging for Buddy to keep his job. And sure enough, it actually worked. Buddy Ryan stayed and damn near everyone else was fired, and now it's time to reintroduce an old character. Even though they left on terrible terms, Mike Ditka apparently also knew George Halas's weakness, sending him a letter basically saying, "Please hire me as a coach, trust me, it'll go well." And George said, what the hell, this guy's insane and has a cool mustache, so let's go for it. And on January 20th, 1982, the Chicago Bears hired Mike Ditka to be their new head coach. So the pieces were starting to come together, and besides Walter Payton still being amazing, Buddy Ryan, the mad scientist, came up with a semi-new revolutionary defensive concept, building off of some of the best defenses of all time, such as the Gritsblitz Falcons and even some of his own teams. When he stirred that all together into one delectable dish, what he got was something called the 46 defense, and in time, it would become the most dangerous tool weaponized by the greatest football team ever. Now, the 46 defense was a very creative concept, but on paper it seemed like it could never really work, because what the Bears basically did was bring down either a safety and or two linebackers as close to the line of scrimmage as possible, and usually at least two of them would blitz the quarterback, which meant that the defensive ends and tackles were getting one-on-one matchups. So if the secondary could hold up, quarterbacks were going to have maybe 3 seconds max to get a throw off before a 250-pound human boulder was dropped on their spinal cords. The concept itself was just brutal. The goal was to try and kill the quarterback, simply put. But even if the Bears had the best defense in the world, a good coach, and an all-time great running back, they still needed something at quarterback, anything. And in the 1982 draft, they got something all right, as the Chicago Bears drafted Jim McMahon, a controversial quarterback on so many levels coming into the league, and like Ditka, he seemed absolutely out of his mind. But as a prospect, he was short, unathletic, and had terrible vision because he stabbed himself with a fork as a kid, but that didn't matter to the Bears, and Chicago took him 5th overall, and in his first ever press conference after being drafted, the dude just cracked open a cold one, so the Bears definitely got themselves a character. Okay, this team was starting to come together, but they didn't get to unleash their full potential completely in 1982 because of a strike-shortened season, and they lacked the complete personnel as well. Then, in 1983, the Bears had a complicated season because, on one hand, they continued to show potential. They had big wins over contenders like the Broncos and 49ers, and although at one point they were 3-7, they rallied to end the season and won 5 of their last 6 games. But on the other hand, George Halas passed away, and his loss was felt throughout the team in the most devastating way possible. George Halas was the Chicago Bears, and it seemed impossible to imagine this team without Papa Bear, but the show must go on, and now the issue of ownership had to be dealt with, and due to his son prematurely passing away as well, this meant that the Bears organization would be passed down to his daughter, Virginia McCaskey, while her son, Michael, would become the team president, despite George Halas allegedly making it very clear on his deathbed that Michael McCaskey should not come anywhere near having a huge say in the Bears' football decisions. So although it was starting to get messy upstairs, heading into the 1984 NFL season, the Chicago Bears were past that rebuilding phase, and I purposely did this, okay? I didn't tell you all the maniacs the Bears had on defense alone at this point. So it's time, okay? Sit down and put yourself in the perspective of an NFL quarterback about to face the Chicago Bears on a warm Sunday afternoon. So the Bears defense consisted of Richard Dent, a Hall of Famer, Dan Hampton, a Hall of Famer, Mike Singletary, Hall of Famer, Steve McMichael, Hall of Famer, Gary Fenchick, and Wilbur Marshall. These are all pro players, most of which are just straight up in the Hall of Fame, and that's just part of the defense. I didn't even mention other Pro Bowl level glue guys like Otis Wilson and Dave Duerson. I mean, I don't even think we've ever seen more talent on any side of the ball since then. And by the way, did you forget that Walter Payton was on the other side of the ball? Because he is. And in 1984, Walter continued to anchor the offense pretty much by himself, breaking Jim Brown's all-time rushing record in just 9 years on the job. And after a Week 9 game where the Bears sacked Archie Manning and the Vikings 11 times, ending his career in the NFL, the Bears came into a Week 10 game against the defending Super Bowl champion Raiders for a chance to prove they belonged in the ring of contenders. The game began, and immediately blood, guts, and tears and whatnot was shed and thrown all over the place. I mean, this wasn't even a football game. It was Valhalla out there. Granted, these two organizations have always been very similar on both priding themselves on physicality, but god damn, man. Buddy Ryan's defense in this game alone knocked out every active quarterback for the Raiders. First, Mark Wilson took a bullet from Otis Wilson and instantly suffered a concussion and a broken thumb, so with him out of the game, David Hum, the backup for this game for the Raiders, came in and, I shit you not, got his teeth knocked out and legs shattered, ending his career. And watching this on the sideline, Hall of Fame punter Ray Guy, the team's emergency quarterback, straight up refused to go into the game. And honestly, who could blame him? This forced Mark Wilson to go back out there playing the rest of the game floating in and out of consciousness because 1980s football, and the Raiders lost the game. But we're not done here yet, because the Raiders fucked up the Bears too, and on one singular hit, Jim McMahon was smashed by multiple Raiders and literally got his kidney ripped in half. How? So with McMahon clinging on to life itself, the Bears didn't have a quarterback anymore, but the defense may just be enough to get them into the playoffs alone, because in 2 games in a row, they had just logged 20 sacks in 2 games. What? That doesn't happen. That shouldn't happen. And this 84 Bears defense would go on to finish the season with the most sacks out of any NFL team in a season with 72 sacks, averaging out to 4.5 sacks per game. You know, just as you do. Wait a minute, 70 sacks? How the hell does this team not dominate their way to a Super Bowl, right? I mean, when teams can't even throw a ball forward because the quarterback's too scared of getting in a car crash mid-game, then how do the Bears even lose? Well, like I said, Jim McMahon did get hurt, and to be honest, this shouldn't have been that huge of an issue, but the Bears' backup quarterbacks were a bit challenged. The 2 other QBs behind McMahon were Steve Fuller and the GOAT himself, Rusty Lish, and after Fuller got injured, in a game versus the Green Bay Packers in Week 15, Rusty Lish got the start, and boy was he stinky. Now our boy Rusty, a few years back, was voted as the single worst player in NFL history by Deadspin. And why was that, you may ask? Well, besides having a career passer rating of 25.1, Jesus. In this game versus Green Bay, Rusty played like absolute human vomit, to the point where Mike Ditka mentally tortured him on the sideline, took him out of the game in the second quarter, and replaced him with Walter Payton. I don't even have words for how humiliating that must have been. Imagine you've worked your whole life for one goal. You finally get that goal, and once you have your big chance in the professional leagues, your boss just tells you to get out and replaces you with the janitor. That's basically what happened to Rusty. And as the season ended, the Bears went 10-6 and had one of the best defenses of all time, but literally did not have a quarterback. And although they won their divisional round matchup versus Washington with Walter Payton using his arm a few times, in the NFC Championship game versus the 49ers, the eventual Super Bowl champions, they just couldn't compete. But here's the thing. Half the team did compete. The Bears defense played really, really well. Joe Montana had his worst playoff game ever to that point, getting sacked 3 times and throwing 2 picks, but still, the offense did nothing at all. The 49ers had 228 net passing yards, which isn't even that good, while the Steve Fuller-led Bears were chilling with 37 net passing yards all game long, and the Bears were sent home in a shutout 23-0. All hope now turned to Jim McMahon. If he could get healthy, then the Bears' offense would be good again, right? Well, the issues with the offense may run a little bit deeper. Mike Ditka and Ed Hughes, the offensive coordinator, were the 2 guys calling the offense, and since Ditka was the head coach, more often than not, he'd be the one that would make the final call, and a lot of the time what he drew up was simply not the move. According to former Bears quarterback Bob Avellini, who played for Ditka, there were moments out there where Mike just didn't use his brain and would rather the Bears run a play that didn't work that he sent in rather than a 90-yard touchdown audible by the quarterback. So that's not super convincing, but hey, it didn't matter how bad the play calling is at certain points, because if you can run HB Blast 30 times a game to Walter Payton, you got a chance to win games. And going into 1985, the Chicago Bears truly believed they were about to prove to the rest of the league what they were capable of at full power, completely healthy and ready to go. And in a Week 3 game versus the Minnesota Vikings, they did exactly that. Now, ironically, they weren't healthy in this game, with Jim McMahon nursing a who knows at this point injury, and was basically ruled out before the game. But after the Vikings built a big lead, Ditka put McMahon in the game, and on the very first play he was in, after almost falling over with 15 grams of pure Novocaine injected straight into his veins, McMahon threw a perfect pass for a 70-yard touchdown, and from there, the Bears had new life. They won the game and never looked back again for the rest of the season. By 1985, the Chicago Bears had perfected the 46 defense. It seemed unstoppable. No matter what offenses did, Chicago just had an advantage everywhere. Like I said, they had 3 Hall of Famers on the defensive line alone, so guys like Dan Hampton and Richard Dent were routinely cooking even double teams, which allowed other guys like Otis Wilson or Wilbur Marshall to rush the quarterback unblocked. And honestly, the physical damage the Bears did in 1985 was historic, and we'll get there in a second, but the psychological damage they did to QBs was honestly worse. Dudes just straight up played to finish the game alive rather than win versus the Bears, and the Chicago buzzsaw just kept going. In Week 6, they blew out the 49ers and even gave their 350-pound rookie defensive tackle William the Refrigerator Perry a carry for funsies, and eventually that ended up becoming a thing. For the memes, Ditka decided to put him in on special teams and gave him the ball a week later versus Green Bay, where he would score his first ever touchdown, and then 2 weeks later, the big guy caught one too. And now I'm just kind of realizing this was probably just to fuck with the Packers on purpose. And with the emergence of everyone's favorite household appliance becoming a nationwide star, bro, tell me this doesn't look like the most cursed serial killer broadcast ever. But not only did the fridge get famous, but the rest of the team did too. Everyone was getting brand deals left and right, appearing on commercials, magazines, and all that, but still, William Perry was the most well-known figure as just a rookie. The dude had his own cheerleader squad. So now after week 9, the Bears were 9-0 and won almost every game by more than 10, and they didn't stop there either. The morgue had already been filled up, but mid-season, they just kept piling up body after body. So here's the Bears body count tracker in 1985. Through the first 12 weeks of the season, when the Chicago Bears went 12-0, they knocked out quarterback Lynn Dickey in week 7, knocked out Tommy Kramer in week 8, held Lions QB Eric Hipple to a 19 passer rating, so honestly it would have been better if he was knocked out, absolutely smashed both Cowboys quarterbacks Danny White and Gary Hogboom multiple times, and they killed the Falcons quarterback David Archer in a week 12 obliteration. This team had 12 hitmen on defense and weren't taking any prisoners. I mean, from weeks 11 through 12, the Bears outscored their opponents 80-0. And if you add the passer ratings of both quarterbacks who played the majority of the game together in Gary Hogboom and David Archer, you would get a passer rating of 0. They both had a passer rating of 0 versus the Bears. I mean, if that doesn't convince you this isn't a top 3 defense of all time, no questions asked, I don't know what will. It just wasn't fair. I mean, I can't express enough how rare a team like this. The 1985 Bears squad was absurd. A team like this comes around once every 20 years or so, and even though the relationship between Buddy Ryan and Mike Ditka was growing increasingly hostile, with Ditka not even being allowed in defensive meetings anymore, who cares? If they kept winning, Buddy could threaten Ditka with a hand grenade and he could get away with it. Until, finally, the Bears hit their first roadblock, and boy was it a big one. It turns out the Bears weren't completely immortal, and the 46 defense wasn't flawless because in a Week 13 game versus Dan Marino and Don Shula's Dolphins, a team that was fighting to keep the 72 Dolphins title alive as the only undefeated team to win a Super Bowl, they clobbered the Bears, rolling Marino out of the pocket and getting receivers open using the spread offense to blitz the Bears right out of the gate, holding a 31-10 lead at halftime, and it ended up getting even uglier from there. Now, in Chicago's defense, they were without Jim McMahon, but the main problem was defensively in this game, and instead of adjusting at halftime and almost fighting Mike Ditka in the locker room as you do, Buddy Ryan stuck to the 46 defense, dying by his own hand, leaving a linebacker to cover a receiver for the rest of the game, and Chicago had no hope from there, suffering their worst loss since the NFC Championship game a year prior. This loss was rough. It taught them multiple lessons about confidence and clearly was very humbling for the Bears. But not humbling enough, so imagine you just got violently penetrated for 60 minutes by this guy and a team that was favored to go to the Super Bowl to play you, and instead of locking in, you decide to release a f***ing whole team rap song a day later. What in the Juju Smith-Schuster is going on here? It sounds deranged though, but this is what made the Bears the Bears. This is why people still put up with the depression of watching them play every single Sunday right now, because once upon a time, they pulled out shit like this, and to be fair to them, they already recorded the song and instead filmed the music video, but still, it definitely rubbed people the wrong way, and rightfully so. But the song itself was a hit. The Super Bowl Shuffle became a massive seller, and it even got nominated for a Grammy. And now all the Bears had to do was back it up and actually get to the Super Bowl, or else this could age like a 12-pack of eggs in the back of a sauna. Anyway, the Bears closed out the season winning the rest of their games, but they weren't as dominant as before. I mean, this is a trend that we've seen with the greatest teams in NFL history time and time again. But hey, 15-1 and Defensive Player of the Year for Mike Singletary isn't that bad, right? I could make a bigger deal out of that record, but I think you already know all you need to know about this team, as the Bears didn't even make the divisional round a contest over the Giants, who just beat the 49ers, shutting them out, and they did the exact same thing against Eric Dickerson and the Rams, unleashing a flurry on Dieter Brock, the 34-year-old rookie, 24-0, and everything was going perfectly according to plan, with linebacker Wilbur Marshall in a perfect movie shot, returning a fumble for a touchdown in the snow to ice the game for Chicago. God, I'm f***ing hilarious. So they did it! The Bears clinched their first ever Super Bowl appearance and waited for their seemingly all but inevitable rematch with Dan Marino and the Miami Dolphins. Or not. Instead, Tony Eason and the New England Patriots absolutely flattened the Dolphins 31-14, robbing us of one of the most anticipated Super Bowls of all time, and everyone was so confident that the Bears had this game in the bag. The Bears were 10-point favorites, had the Super Bowl Shuffle already made, and demolished the Patriots earlier in the year, but it can't be that easy, because what's a Super Bowl without at least an attempted collapse before the game even starts? With Jim McMahon having a wild week before the game, like usual, mooning helicopters, and was quoted saying that all Chicago women are sluts and the men are all stupid beyond belief, which none of that he actually said, but it was a massive negative media storm that did eventually blow over. But the worst news the Bears got, and the first domino falling in the Bears' eventual collapse, came right before the Super Bowl started. As the team was preparing to take the field, in the locker room, defensive coordinator Buddy Ryan, in an emotional speech to his players, simply said, "You guys will always be my heroes," when addressing the rumor that he's going to take the Eagles' head coaching job, and then just walked out the room. So, you know, maybe not the best time to break the news to the squad, but hey, it kinda worked. Steve McMichael threw a chair into the blackboard, and the guys started to feel energized again with testosterone flowing through them to go out there and finish the job for Buddy. And what ensued was one of the most violent, brutal, ruthless, and one-sided Super Bowls to ever happen.
A serious injury. Eason out of the shotgun, and here they come. Oh my.
The game was just not even a little bit close. Fittingly, one of the most dominant teams of all time would have one of the most dominant Super Bowl performances of all time as well. Now, the game did start out slow though. Walter Payton fumbled on the opening drive, but once the Bears defense forced a fumble of their own, Chicago's offense had a chance to wake up. Instead, they gave William Perry a fucking HB toss play for the memes again, but after those shenanigans died down, the defense got another forced fumble, and at that point it was just pure carnage. Tony Eason's confidence was wrecked in one quarter, and Steve Grogan, the backup, came in for him, which changed fuck all nothing, and the Bears just played the entire second half, seeing how many Super Bowl records they could get. And my favorite one that really stood out to me was the New England Patriots, by the end of the game, finished with 7 rushing yards, the least ever in a Super Bowl, and the Bears defense finished the game with 7 sacks, still tied for the most ever in a Super Bowl. That means the Bears got the same amount of sacks as they did rushing yards allowed. This was a complete team triumph, with Mike Ditka and Buddy Ryan, the two opposing forces of the team, yet completely integral pieces, were both carried off the field separately in glory, and everyone was having the time of their lives. Well, everyone except for one person. Now, it's widely known that Walter Payton was just pissed after winning the Super Bowl just because he didn't get a touchdown, and he ended up locking himself in a closet and he cried for minutes, all because he didn't score. And I don't know, it's a weird thing, because me personally, I feel like, you know, if your team wins the Super Bowl, that's all that really should matter. But on the other hand, you know, he was the entire Bears offense for the last 10 years, so you can see why he would be upset. But I don't know, man, I feel like he was a little bit overdramatic on this one. But regardless of what you think, even Coach Ditka himself has time and time again expressed regret over not giving Walter the ball, and that was the 1985 Chicago Bears season. And for all the rightful hype the Bears defense got, the offense also was pretty damn good too. It should be mentioned that this team led the entire NFC in scoring, and still to this day was the engine of the highest scoring Bears team in a single season. Now, I hate to dampen the mood here, but according to Steve McMichael, when the Bears got their Super Bowl rings, the NFL itself gives each Super Bowl winning team $4,000 each per ring, and the team owners spend the rest of their own money to customize each ring and just make them look unique, right? Well, Michael McCaskey and the people above decided to splurge a little and didn't add a single cent to the rings. Nothing. And the reasoning behind this was, well, we don't need to spend any money on the rings now because obviously there's going to be way more where that came from. Well, about that. The Chicago Bears seemed to check off every single box that needed to be checked off in order to create a dynasty. They had a coach, they had Hall of Famers on both sides of the ball, a great culture, and best of all, they had the youngest team in the entire NFL at the time, and they just won the Super Bowl. So, in 1986, I mean, you can see why the owners thought that this team was just going to keep on racking up the wins, and the Bears came into the season as maybe the heaviest Super Bowl favorite of all time, and on paper, they seemed to just have one flaw. One singular thing holding them back, and that would be the departure of Buddy Ryan. And maybe without Buddy commanding his troops, the defense would take a little bit of a step back. But, no. No, they did not. Or at least they didn't immediately, because although Buddy, as well as defensive line coach Dave Haupt, were gone, much to the delight of Mike Ditka, the Bears' defense remained absolutely elite in this pre-free agency landscape of the NFL. And honestly, you could make the case the 86 Bears defense was even better than 1985. In 86, they allowed less total yards, less total touchdowns, and forced significantly more fumbles too. So this team was still venomous, but the quarterback curse of Johnny Lujack, I guess, still stayed with the Bears because the offense was on and off with injuries to Jim McMahon, but it just didn't matter. Throughout the season, the Bears were swallowing all their prey whole until one guy made one bad decision. There are hated NFL players for specific franchises, and then there's this abomination. His name is Charles Martin. And I'm dead serious. If there were Bears fans out there that were able to see Charles Martin in real life, they would have actually killed the guy. He was that hated in the city. And in this game, the Bears came in as locks for the Super Bowl in the NFL.
The Chicago Bears came into the game as locks to represent the NFL, the NFC in the Super Bowl, and left the game as a shell of their former selves because of one play. The one hit delivered by Charles Martin, which is easily considered to be the dirtiest hit in NFL history.
What is this?
Wow, man, that's
ridiculous. He should be out of the game.
Yep, that's all it took. One hit on one play, and the Chicago Bears dynasty fell from a 24-story building and splattered all over the fucking concrete. It was 1984 all over again, and according to Walter Payton himself, although losing Jim McMahon was a massive confidence killer for the team as well as a personnel one, since the team already won the Super Bowl, they had lost a massive chunk of their hunger, and instead of staying up the night before to study film and all that, most of the guys were just saying, you know what, fuck it, and just going out for a night clubbing instead. But whatever, you get the idea. I can make all the excuses in the world I want as to how the Bears didn't win in 86 and become a dynasty, but really not having Jim McMahon was the main answer. And without the services of everyone's favorite drunk driver, the Bears were stuck with a combination of 23-year-old Mike Tomczak and 24-year-old Doug Flutie, who they traded for during the season to try and rekindle some of his college magic in the NFL. However, it would not work out that way at all, and now the Bears found themselves in a doomsday scenario where they had an actual all-time great defense and went 14-2, which isn't the worst record ever, and in the divisional round, they decided to start Doug Flutie, who would develop into the Canadian serial goat, but in the 86 playoffs versus the Skins, in his second career start, he simply wasn't ready, and trust me, from personal experience, it is never a good idea to start a rookie quarterback in the playoffs. Never. Watching these Bears versus Washington highlights was like watching a 4-year-old drive around Dale Earnhardt in a race. I mean, the Bears defense was clamping, as they've done all year, but Doug Flutie couldn't do anything productive at all, and despite holding a 13-7 lead at halftime, the Bears couldn't hold on in the second, and Doug Flutie's 2 picks, 33 passer rating, and almost doubling his amount of completions with incompletions, they just didn't have a chance. And the Chicago Bears, with one of the best rosters ever, 1 year removed from having the best team of all time, didn't win a single playoff game and lost to a Hall of Fame coach in Joe Gibbs 27-13. So that was it. The Bears came into the divisional round versus the Skins, winning 32 of their last 36 games, and yet they only had 1 Super Bowl appearance to show for it. And going into 1987, in just 2 years, the team was starting to fall apart. The narrative was the Skins have dethroned the Bears forever. Walter Payton was in his late 30s, and the tough love style of coaching Mike Ditka lived and died by was slowly losing its impact. But the star power did remain on the team, so that was still there. Mike Singletary and Steve McMichael were still assassins, anchoring the number 4 defense in the league, which isn't the untouchable status as the previous couple years, but hey, they'll take it. Also, it should be said that 1987 was a strike-shortened year, and the Bears played 3 games with a bunch of nobodies, so their stats were a little bit decreased overall because of Sean Payton playing football for them, but the Bears were still an amazing team, and in Week 13, they were sitting with a 10-2 record and were feared around the league like per usual until they weren't. Week 14. Primetime football versus the San Francisco 49ers. The 10-win Bears versus the 11-win Niners was set up to be the game of the year. Now, Jim McMahon would be out for this game, but the man's injured for like 70% of all games, so that shouldn't even surprise you in the slightest. And the Bears were expected to put up at least a hell of a fight with the defense alone, but the only one who put up a fight was Coach Ditka after beefing with a fan. And I guess one thing led to another, and Mike threw the piece of gum he was chewing at some girl and almost got charged with assault for it. So, by that little nugget of fun information, you can probably guess how the game went. It was pure destruction. 41-0. The 49ers just mowed them down, and the team morale really seemed to take a hit the same way it did in '86, as the Bears finished the regular season off with a statement 6-3 win over the Raiders, and questions remained if Jim McMahon would be himself come playoff time, or if he would even play at all. At this point, Jim McMahon was a walking hospital. When the playoff date was set for the Bears, McMahon would officially be ruled active, but just barely. He clearly was not himself, though, which everyone knew. However, McMahon and Chicago made a business decision that a drugged-out Jim would still be better than anything Chicago had to offer at quarterback. So it was rematch time. Same teams, same place, same time as last season 1 year ago, Bears vs. Skins, except this time, Chicago had a quarterback. And in the Bears' last ride, they needed a different outcome than last year to keep this fleeting dream of a dynasty alive for 1 more year. And unlike last time, the Bears did not come to f*** around. Hibernation week was over and the feeding frenzy was about to begin, with the Bears opening up the game with a brutal strip sack, 2 touchdowns, and a commanding 14-0 lead. And you know, every single time I ever say a team is a massive lead, they're obviously going to blow it. And the Bears did exactly that, allowing Washington for the 2nd year in a row to come back, this time with a different quarterback in Doug Williams to snatch their spirit from their prison of flesh and rip it out. And they had chances to avoid that outcome too. Hell, even right after taking the 14-0 lead, facing a 3rd and 9, if Washington wasn't able to pick this up and the Bears defense got a stop, things could have snowballed out of control. But instead, Doug Williams found his receiver Ricky Sanders, which led to a touchdown drive, and Washington stole all the momentum from there. As the game drew on, Washington continued to exploit the Bears' constant blitzing to get quick throws off, and when the game was stuck at 14-all, one of a few Hall of Famers on that Washington roster, Darryl Green, made the play of the game by jumping over a full f***ing grown human to take a 7-point lead. And Washington ended up winning the war of attrition again, to this time once and for all to end this Bears dynasty that could have been unbeatable in another multiverse. But hold on, because this wasn't just a complete choke job, and instead, the Johnny Lujack curse made sure the Bears dynasty could not even show signs of blooming, because you know that 14-0 lead I was talking about? Well, Jim McMahon, the guy who was doing his best to fully resist the Lujack curse time and time again, could not shake it off this time, injuring his shoulder after the Bears' second touchdown, and after a few interceptions and some more awful passes later because, you know, he didn't have his arm, that was it. Blame was still passed around everywhere though. From Ditka's play calling to the defensive coverages, everyone was just finding something to blame to help them cope, and coping was definitely needed for Bears fans, because after 1987, Walter Payton retired. The best running back in the history of the NFL was no longer in the league, and just not having number 34 on the sideline for the orange and blue would be very hard for Bears fans to get used to. Now, once again, remember that we're still in the pre-unrestricted free agency era, so the Bears' talent remained strong, but it was aging fast. Walter Payton retired, Dan Hampton was 31, Steve McMichael 31 as well, Mike Singletary was 30, and all of those guys, minus Mike Singletary, who aged amazingly, never made another Pro Bowl in their careers, and the best days of their prime were easily behind them. Slowly but surely, the 85 Bears were crumbling, as they did lose even more pieces, with All-Pro linebacker Wilbur Marshall becoming the first free agent to sign with a new team in almost a decade, signing the richest contract ever for a defensive player, which was a 5-year, $6 million deal. We've really come a long way. So Wilbur being gone was obviously a huge loss, but it didn't look like it would matter right away, because in week 1, they absolutely blew out Dan Marino and the Dolphins, a team that supposedly hard countered them, but just when the Bears started to get up, the Johnny Lujack curse slammed them back down and shattered their spleen, handing out injuries to Richard Dent, Jim McMahon, of course, Hall of Fame tackle Jimbo Covert, who had back surgery, Otis Wilson had a career-ending injury, Pro Bowl safety Sean Gale missed almost the whole season, and hell, even Mike Ditka had a heart attack. So, I mean, the nerve hammer struck this Bears team, and it struck it hard. Once again, though, not having a consistently good quarterback was the death of the 1988 Bears, despite having the league's best defense again, with Mike Singletary taking home yet another Defensive Player of the Year, as they finished the season with a 12-4 record and even won the famous Fog Bowl without Jim McMahon. But in the NFC Championship game, they ran into the 49ers, who were just on a completely different level than them, and with Jim McMahon starting and playing horribly again, the Bears never stood a chance, losing the game 28-3, and then the real end of this era for the Bears began. The 1989 Bears were a sad, sad team to see take the field. They didn't have it anymore. Not only because Jim McMahon was traded to the Chargers, but the defense was actually ass now. They went from 1st to 4th to 1st over the last 3 years to now they were sitting at 21st. And remember, there were only 28 teams in the entire league, so that 21st was equal to a 25th overall place in the modern day. And with a bad defense, the Bears simply lost their identity. I mean, this team was just not good anymore. They drafted Jim Harbaugh as their new franchise quarterback, and after the team was 4-1 in week 6, mainly through a lot of easy opponents, the Bears lost to the Oilers in a 28-33 nail-biter. And afterwards, Coach Ditka rationally told the media that he'd be shocked if the Bears can win a single game for the rest of the year. And to his credit, he was sort of right. It took a little while, but after week 11, the Bears didn't win a single game for the rest of the year. So any semblance of hope was so over at this point. And as we move into the 1990s, things get a little bit complicated, because on the surface, it looked like the Bears were on the come-up, logging back-to-back 11-5 campaigns in 1990 and 1991, with Jim Harbaugh starting to develop nicely, and with Pro Bowl running back Neil Anderson becoming a real threat, the Bears became a balanced team. But below the waters, it was a whole nother story. From 1990 through 1991, the Bears were destroying almost every team below 500, going 19-3 against that competition, but when they had to battle the real teams in the league, they just weren't up to the challenge, only going 3-7 in games against teams over 500, which is why the Bears only managed to win one playoff game in that stretch of time, and that win came against the New Orleans Saints, who had literally yet to win a single playoff game in their entire franchise's existence yet. And if the Bears' potential dynasty was dead already, 1992 was the wake. Harbaugh's development wasn't going as smoothly as it once was, and a majority of that blame went to Coach Ditka, who famously, in 1992, called out Jim Harbaugh after he audibled out of one of his play calls that resulted in a game-losing interception. And Mike was so pissed off, he was seriously at risk of having another heart attack, and although his relationship with Harbaugh seemed increasingly unrepairable, there was more to it on a team-wide scale too. According to Dave Duerson, the Bears' Pro Bowl safety who left after 1989, Mike Ditka was very adamant about his players not doing a ton of commercials and endorsement deals and just sticking to football, and would routinely lash out at players for doing those deals, but then right after he'd say something like that, you'd turn on the TV and there's Mike trying to sell you barbecue sauce. Add that onto Jim Harbaugh never really feeling like Ditka and the players wanted him in the first place, mainly because Mike literally told him that he didn't want him, and after a 5-win campaign in 1992, the Chicago Bears moved on to another era. Mike Ditka was fired, Mike Singletary retired, and that was the official end of what remained from the 1985 Bears. And although they only won one Super Bowl, when you play that aggressively for that long, the human body can really only sustain that level of excellence for so long. But fuck, those guys gave it everything they had, and unfortunately, there were some grim prices that needed to be paid. Dan Hampton, the Hall of Famer, finished his career with great stats, but his injury stats were also, unfortunately, pretty high in the number category. He would go on to have 10 knee surgeries, 5 on each knee, as well as 15 broken bones and over 300 stitches, all from just his playing days. And he may have had the easiest path compared to other guys, such as Jim McMahon, because his career was absolutely destroyed by injuries, suffering 2 season-ending injuries from 1984 through 86, including another broken hand injury that was allegedly dismissed by the Bears medical staff as Jim got a cast on the hand himself that was forcibly removed to hide the fact that he was hurt. And according to Jim McMahon himself, later on in his life, he found out that he just casually had a broken neck, and when the doctors asked him how the hell this even happened, the man wasn't even completely sure. So, with Ditka's departure, the Chicago Bears hired Dave Wanstead and only retained Harbaugh for 1 more year before letting him walk in 1994 to the Colts. But by now, not only have the Bears continuously had just massive quarterback problems, but the wide receiver issue was maybe even worse. I still can't believe this statistic is real, but I double and triple checked, so believe me when I say from 1971 through 1994, for 24 years, the Chicago Bears, a professional sports organization, did not have a single 1,000-yard receiver at any point during a season. What the fuck? I mean, even Patrick Mahomes would struggle with Greg McMurtry as his wide receiver 1, but that doesn't mean the 90s squad of QBs in Chicago wasn't abysmal, though. In 1994, the Bears signed Eric Kramer from the Lions to try and become their new franchise quarterback, and although he did set the single-season passing record for the Bears to this day, throwing for 3,800 yards, which was, less than what Sam Howell threw for last year, Kramer wasn't all that special, but he was serviceable until, guess what? The Johnny Lujack curse came back for round 7, and a separated shoulder and a few herniated discs in his neck later, and that was it for that little experiment. And that was just one of the 34 things that made the 1990s one of the most painful decades of football for Bears fans to endure. But the main reason as to why Bears fans kept the toaster on standby during bath time was their drafting. They just constantly wasted draft pick after draft pick. It was pretty bad in the early 90s with Dave Wanstead mastering the art of mid, keeping the team at either 9-7 or 7-9 for 4 straight years until we got to 1997, because about a month before the 1997 draft, holding the 11th overall pick, the Bears didn't like the quarterback class available, and guys like Jim Druckenmiller or Jake Plummer, not even lying, those were the top 2 quarterbacks that year, and so they went on a little shopping spree, hoping somebody would offer them a very good quarterback for such a high pick. Who they got was Rick Mirer. And if you don't know who that is, Google the biggest draft bust in NFL history and a few scrolls later, and I'm sure you'll find a picture of old Rick. Everyone knew that Rick Mirer was an awful football player, but for some reason, the Bears saw something in him. They looked at Rick with a romantic glaze in their eye and gave away the 11th overall pick for Rick Mirer. And during his entire career as the franchise savior in Chicago, Rick was actually phenomenal. I can't even lie. You got to give him credit where credit's due. And as a Chicago Bear in his entire career, he had 420 yards, 6 interceptions, 0 touchdowns, and got sacked 16 times, and then booked it for Green Bay requesting his own release. Well, all right then. That's one way to use a first-round pick, but don't worry, it gets even funnier, because with Rick Mirer and Eric Kramer playing quarterback in 1997, the Bears lost their first 7 games of the season, and in Week 12, they found themselves sitting with a 1-10 record, the exact same as Jim Harbaugh's Colts, and just like that, the Bears were engaged in a tank pool. But here's the thing. Dave Wanstead was playing for his job, and for some reason, the Bears kept him around for not only the rest of the season, but for one more year as well, with Wanstead finding a way to miraculously rally the troops of a roster that contained 0 Pro Bowlers on it to win 3 of their last 5 games, meaning the Bears would miss out on the top spot in the draft, and the Colts grabbed the Sheriff first overall. Could have been nice to have Peyton on the team, I guess, but more on that later. So okay, they blew the tank job, but they still had a top 5 pick and used it to draft Curtis Enis, a running back out of Penn State, to become the next Walter Payton, and he was not. Curtis was out of the NFL before I was even born, and you know what, just for fun, let's check who mock drafts had the Bears taking at the time. I don't know, I'm kind of curious. Oh, how do you do it, Bears fans? How do you find the will to keep going? Surely it can't get worse from here. I mean, after the 1998 season, they finally fired Dave Wanstead and were looking to draft a quarterback, and it looked like they got their guy in Cade McNown, 12th overall. So yeah, let's do it. It's time for a new era of nothing but wins, prosperity, and mustaches. But no, the Bears were ass yet again, and who could have guessed it? But McNown wasn't the answer either. Following a discouraging 1999 campaign, he followed that up with a shitstorm in 2000, where of course he would get injured because the curse lives on, and once he was traded in 2000, he never played another down in the NFL again. Cade McNown will go down as at least the 2nd worst draft pick in this team's history. I mean, this dude was a buffoon. He's best known for vomiting on the field in college and getting charged for consistently parking in disabled parking spots. And also, the man was a frequent visitor of good old Hugh Hefner's crib. And I don't know, I guess after f***ing too many women, he got himself banned from the mansion entirely. Guys, I'm not f***ing high right now. I swear, this actually happened. This is where we find Bears fans at peak misery, and unfortunately, it got even worse when the news of Walter Payton's untimely death was broken to the public. It was not a good time to be a Chicago Bears fan. The team had no quarterback, still, no future, no good coach, no reliable ownership, no GM, nothing. But there was some shakeup upstairs that still affects the Bears to this day, and that came when Virginia McCaskey fired Michael McCaskey, her son, from football operations and forced him to step down as president, which, you know, sounds like a good thing, except the biggest problem with Bears management just kept coming back. Incompetent people were put in charge, which led to them hiring more incompetent people, and Ted Phillips became the official president of the Chicago Bears, who still to this day has a mixed legacy as Bears president. So you know the drill. The Bears were still trash, but in 2000, finally, the football gods showed pity on Bears fans. It had only been 15 years since the '85 Bears held the Lombardi, but it felt like 100. However, once they drafted Brian Urlacher and Mike Brown in back-to-back drafts for the first time in almost 2 decades, Bears fans had something to believe in. 2000 was another year of absolutely nothing, like I said before, but before the 2001 season, everything changed. I mean, we still had the usual Bears front office incompetence, like when Ted Phillips outright vetoed a draft day trade that would have landed the Bears LaDainian Tomlinson. So, if you're keeping track at this point, if the Bears had good ownership, they might have had Peyton Manning and LaDainian Tomlinson in one backfield, but whatever, who cares, I guess, because for the first time in 10 years, the Bears would win double-digit games in 2001 and didn't whiff on an entire draft, this time bringing in running back Anthony Thomas, who would go on to run for over 1,000 yards as a rookie, so I mean, who needs LT, and became 75% of the offense for the next couple of seasons. So, okay, there was the bruising running back mold that the Bears have always had, and step 2 was now the defense, and boy, did the Bears have a defense. In just their second years, both Mike Brown and Brian Urlacher had already become all-pros, and alongside other pieces like Ted Washington, the Bears did it. They regained the top spot for the best defense in the entire NFL and finished the season with a 13-3. So surely they were Super Bowl contenders, except not only were they not anywhere near other teams like the Rams or Packers, but almost nobody was taking them seriously. Am I being a little dramatic here? Yes. Okay, this team did win 13 games, like I said, so they were good, but damn, they got lucky as hell. And read anything on this team, and that's all everyone says. They just got lucky, and because, well, it's kind of true. Mike Brown famously had back-to-back pick sixes to beat both the 49ers and Browns in weeks 7 and 8, and besides that core memory for Bears fans, there were so many more plays kinda like that. I mean, they won a game versus Washington off of a Brian Urlacher fake field goal reception for a touchdown, and the only reason they even had a chance for that second Mike Brown pick six was because a Hail Mary got them to overtime in the first place. I mean, it was crazy. You never knew what was going to happen with this team. One week a player was getting charged with punching a valet driver for losing his keys, and another fat-ass Keith Traylor is running 70 yards on a pick. This team was just entertainment incarnate, but like I said, still too lucky for people to begin to fear. But they were expected to take out the trash at home, favored by about a field goal or so in the divisional round versus the Eagles. And it was looking okay-ish early on. They held Donovan McNabb and the Eagles offense to just a single touchdown in the first half, but it was a good run. It really was. But now it was time for the football gods to recast the curse of Johnny Lujack to engulf the entirety of Soldier Field yet again, with Jim Miller, the Bears starting quarterback, going down with a shoulder injury, ruling him out for the remainder of the game. And honestly, this was sort of the end of his career. Even Jim himself admitted he was never the same player again after this injury, as the Johnny Lujack curse claimed yet another soul of a potential franchise QB for the Bears. And from there, it was pretty much over. The Bears' offense with a backup quarterback couldn't do anything against Brian Dawkins and the Eagles' defense, and from there on out, Philly cruised to a 33-19 victory, and it was back to the drawing board for Chicago. Now, because of this successful season, though, the Bears sort of had to keep head coach Dick Jarrett around, even though he wasn't really all that. And when you add that on to monster free agency signings like Christian Peter, the Bears remained completely stagnant, and after all that luck settled down too, for the next 2 seasons the Bears had losing records and everything went back to normal. Coach got fired, their quarterbacks were still awful, and a new commander was needed to lead the talent that was still on the roster. But that did come in 2004, when the Bears hired Lovie Smith to be their next head coach, and at the time, people were definitely a little interested by this move, mainly because, well, Lovie Smith was clearly a defensive-minded head coach. He had spent 5 years in Tampa Bay during the Golden Age with Tony Dungy, so when he came to Chicago and immediately implemented the Tampa 2 defense, it wasn't 100% clear if this was the right move for a defense that was already extremely effective. But Lovie had some fantastic pieces to work with. Recently, the Bears actually didn't have the worst draft picks in the world when they took defensive tackle Tommy Harris 14th overall in 2004 and got possibly the steals of the entire draft in 2003 when they took linebacker Lance Briggs in the 3rd round and Charles Tillman in the 2nd. So this defense was just bleeding talent. All they needed now was someone to maximize that potential, which Lovie showed signs of doing in 2004, improving the overall defense from 22nd the year prior all the way up to 13th, while also all of a sudden being tied for first in the NFL in pick sixes. But remember offense? Well, that's a thing that teams in the NFL have to do from time to time, and the Bears in 2004 maybe did that worse than anyone ever. So let me introduce you to the first offensive coordinator I'm introducing, and not for a good reason, in Terry Shea, a man who would never get another offensive coordinator job after this devastation he enacted with his bare hands. So the Chicago Bears were quarterbacked by their young first-round pick in 2003 that they traded back for Rex Grossman. Then he got hurt. So that left a combination of guys I'm not even going to bother naming because, I mean, we're an hour in at this point. You should understand, apparently the Johnny Lujack curse will not let the Bears have a good QB for as long as he lives, and in 2004, the Bears had the least amount of 3rd down conversions by a team since 2000 to this day, as well as the worst passing touchdown percentage only throwing a touchdown on 1.9% of throws, and had the 5th least total yards out of any team, once again, from 2000 to 2023. And just for the memes, here's those Bears 2004 offensive stats compared to the 2023 Zach Wilson Jets. So, you know, just seeing the Jets be better in most of those categories, including total yards, should scare you for the future of this team. And 2005 honestly could not have started off on a worse note. Once again, Sexy Rexy could not escape the curse and broke his ankle in the preseason, which knocked him out for almost the entire year, which led to a rookie in Kyle Orton becoming the new QB1. And he was a full-functioning shit factory, leading the Bears to a 1-3 record through week 5, and it looked like the whole team had just quit. Mike Brown told the media himself that the team sucks and we have no chance, very similar to Ditka's speech a while back, but this time, he was actually wrong. The Bears completely turned it around, doing the same old thing. Lance Briggs and Brian Urlacher began their quest on becoming one of the best linebacker duos of all time, making all-pro teams in their mid-20s, with Urlacher taking home his first Defensive Player of the Year, while Pro Bowlers Nathan Vasher and Mike Brown held down the secondary, and on offense, they once again had a surprisingly solid rushing attack, with the running back duo of Thomas Jones and Adrian Peterson. Oh wait. That's the wrong one. So, the Bears completely turned it around. They ended up winning 10 of their next 11 games, only allowing more than 10 points 4 times during that entire 11-game stretch. And after a meaningless Week 17 loss, the Chicago Bears were set to host the Carolina Panthers, with Rex Grossman now being supposedly healthy. And the game was pretty much just the entire Chicago Bears versus Steve Smith, who went absolutely nuclear with 12 catches, 218 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And when the Panthers got another touchdown late in the 4th quarter, it looked like the door was shut on another Bears postseason, except they missed the PAT. So it was time for Sexy Rexy to go down the field, have himself a legacy drive, and show the whole world that he's the franchise guy for the Chicago.
Looked like the play clock expired, but Grossman fires and he's picked off by Lucas.
Game, series, Chicago has fucking lost, and at this point, I don't know if there was any hope for them. They had no offensive talent whatsoever. The defense can't just keep doing everything themselves, and hell, even if we look back at the 85 Bears, they had Jim McMahon, who was fine sometimes, and Walter Payton carried most of the offensive load too, but this team just didn't have that. They needed a swagger, and they didn't have it, but finally, it came. In 2006, everything changed with one singular NFL draft pick. The answer hath come. In the 2nd round of the 2006 NFL Draft, the Chicago Bears drafted kick return specialist Devin Hester, and that spark plug that was missing for so long had finally been activated, and the Chicago Bears were on a mission to become the best team in the entire NFL, and through week 5, it looked like they were going to do it. Just by the highlights alone, this team was looking 85-esque, but by looking at the numbers, things get even crazier. Once again, from weeks 1 through 5, the Bears outscored their opponents 156 to 36 points during all 5 of those games, meaning the Bears averaged a whopping 31.2 points per game, while their opponents averaged just 7.2. Their games weren't even close. It was just utter subordination. But then week 6 came along and fucked everything up. The Cardinals were an awful team, but on Monday Night Football, it just wasn't the Bears' night. And after finding themselves down by 20 points in the 4th quarter, they actually managed to come back and win the game. It was a historic choke by the Cardinals. Turnovers were happening everywhere. And after Devin Hester did the thing with a thing, the Chicago Bears became the only team to ever come back down 20-plus points and win a game without a single offensive touchdown, because Rex Grossman on the offensive side of the ball churned up a passer rating of... yeah, you know what? Let's just ignore that and move on. He's still the franchise guy, goddammit. Anyway, it seemed like it was all smiles from here. This win led to an iconic Dennis Green rant, but the Bears didn't leave the battlefield unscathed, as they ended up losing all-pro safety Mike Brown for the entire season with a Lisfranc fracture, and honestly, he would never be the same player again, which was obviously a major blow for the defense, but they just kept on moving forward. Devin Hester just continued to be the best special teams player ever, and by season's end, the Bears finished with another 13-3 record, and an elite defense that was a little bit vulnerable. It really sucks because this defense had all the pieces to be legendary, but injuries to Mike Brown as well as Pro Bowl defensive tackle Tommy Harris knocking them both out for the entire postseason was brutal. But still, this defense was loaded. The usual guys did the usual things, but some random ass dudes were also contributing massive loads. Like, they had a 5th-round rookie named Mark Anderson who had 12 sacks this season and never really did anything else ever again. It's my bad on the wording there. So alright, maybe this season will somehow end differently than it did last year, and it actually did, but it probably shouldn't have. After facing the defending NFC champion Seahawks in just the wild card, it took a Robbie Gould game-winning field goal in overtime to just barely squeak out the win, and then in the NFC Championship game, they took care of the 10-win Saints in a quiet blowout 39-14, and the defense just carried the game. The unit that forced the most turnovers in the entire NFL showed up when it mattered most, coming through with a safety, a pick, and 2 fumbles, taking advantage of a very weak NFC to finally make it back to the Super Bowl. And waiting for them in the big game was the quarterback that really, really should have been theirs. Now, as we've gone over, the Bears were a good team. Not incredible, but just good. However, the Indianapolis Colts were a great team. Peyton Manning, Marvin Harrison, Bob Sanders, Jeff Saturday, Dwight Freeney, there were just Hall of Famers all over the place. So not many were giving Chicago a chance because on one side of the ball was Peyton Manning and the other was the sex cannon himself. But Bears fans were just happy to be back, to be relevant again. And when the game began, it was like a movie scene. The cameras flashed, everyone applauded, and all eyes turned to Devin Hester. And for some godforsaken reason, the Colts kicked him the ball. And of course, the man took it 92 yards all the way to the house for a touchdown. And just like that, the Bears had a chance. They really, really could have stole this game. They even got an immediate pick on Peyton Manning, taking a 14-6 lead. And add that onto the fact that the game was played in an absolute downpour that was only helping the Bears because they were a ground and pound team. But unfortunately, it didn't really work out that way. In fact, the Bears ended up getting beaten at their own game, with both Colts running backs Dominic Rhodes and Joseph Adai combining for over 200 rushing yards on 40 carries, with the Colts absolutely dominating the time of possession battle, and with Peyton Manning somehow outplaying Sexy Rexy, I don't know how he did it either, after a late, atrocious 4th quarter pick 6, the game was officially over. Rex Grossman finished the game barely breaking 100 passing yards in garbage time, and the Bears lost Super Bowl 41, 29-17. So just take a guess how you think it's going to go from here. Do you think the Bears are going to build off that successful season and bounce back to have a great year? Of fucking course not. This is the Chicago Bears we're talking about, and the 2007 and 8 seasons were just not it. Besides Devin Hester setting even more unbreakable records for kick returns, nothing happened. The quarterbacking situation only worsened, with Rex Grossman, Kyle Orton, and Brian Greasy taking turns shoving their dicks down the garbage disposal that was this entire organization, until, after missing the playoffs in back-to-back years, he finally arrived. On April 2nd, 2009, the Chicago Bears traded away Kyle Orton, 2 first-round picks and a 3rd for the one, the only, Jay Cutler. And with him came a new era of Bears football, one where they got themselves a quarterback. Sort of. God, I'm so excited to talk about this hunk of a man. So, Jay Cutler is an interesting guy, and for such a storied franchise as we've gone over, it's pretty amazing that this dude became probably the most polarizing figure in Bears history, and 2009 would be a pretty good example as to why, because with expectations through the roof, Joe Montana was pretty awful, leading the league in interceptions, but the Bears didn't really have a chance at anything all season long, with Brian Urlacher breaking his wrist in week 1, which ended his season. So Bears fans just kind of thought, all right, whatever, let's move on to 2010 and erase that season from memory. So in 2010, they were set to do what they couldn't do to health reasons the year prior, and with the addition of former Greatest Show on Turf mastermind Mike Martz to be the new offensive coordinator, who knows? Maybe he'll unlock Jay Cutler, but the Bears front office also made it a point to go all in on this year, with the addition of Hall of Famer Julius Peppers, and with Lovie Smith's job pretty much being on the line this year, it was a make-or-break season for so many reasons. Now, I wish I could say that the Bears just dominated all the competition with the best roster they've had since '85, but This season was it was such an odd year overall. They finished the year going 11-5, but in week 1, in just the first game, they got a win versus the Lions, but they definitely should not have won that game, because the only reason they got the dub was because of the Calvin Johnson rule that came from this controversial ending. And the craziest thing about this game is if the Bears had lost it, or any other game they had won throughout the rest of 2010, they would have missed the playoffs, but they didn't, and luckily harnessing the spirit of the '85 Bears against Brett Favre, a man who once represented anguish in a green jersey, the Bears knocked him out of the game, and he would never play in the NFL again, as the Bears would close the season out with a loss to the Packers. The NFC was just so tight this season, but regardless, led by Matt Forte, Jay Cutler, and the still elite defense, the Bears edged out the Saints and Eagles for the second seed in the NFC, and got even luckier in the divisional round when Marshawn Lynch and the 7-win Seahawks awaited after upsetting the Saints with the ball sack grab thing. But versus the Bears, the Seahawks couldn't do anything. Like, literally nothing. Marshawn Lynch finished the game with 4 rushing yards, and a Greg Olsen Jay Cutler masterclass helped Chicago jump out to a 28-0 lead. And from there, the date was set. Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers versus Jay Cutler and the Chicago Bears for a chance at a Super Bowl appearance. This was it. If Cutler could get it done versus the Packers in Soldier Field, he'd be a hero forever. But it wasn't meant to be. The game was a complete nightmare. After leading his team into a 0-14 hole, Cutler got injured and never returned to the game after the third quarter. And after benching another quarterback in Todd Collins, the Bears were now forced to start third-string backup Caleb Haney in the goddamn NFC Championship game versus their biggest rivals. But wait a minute, hold on. Caleb Haney came in the game and started balling. He found Johnny Knox for a 30-yard play, which led to a 1-yard score, and just like that, the stadium was alive. Caleb Haney, the savior, had come to bring Chicago to the Super Bowl until one man, the incarnation of hate itself, the spawn of Satan, had come to take everything close and dear to Bears fans' hearts. Charles Martin hurt them once, but this is utter humiliation. On 3rd down and 5, in a 1-possession game with the Bears defense playing out of their minds, B.J. Raji, this 350-pound lunker whose nickname is the Freezer, drops back into coverage, picks off Caleb, and drops it low to clinch a Super Bowl for the Packers. This is it, Bears fans. You see this, man? This is the peak of mental pain a human can experience in football. Just soak it all in, you sad, sad bastards. Well, that does it. Bears fans didn't even bother to turn on the Super Bowl as Aaron Rodgers and the Packers hosted the Lombardi Trophy while the Bears partied in Cancun. And instead of watching the game, Bears fans turned their pitchforks towards Jay Cutler. They were fuming that he took himself out of the game, claiming he even faked the injury entirely. I mean, these old geezers were so used to the Steve McMichaels, the Mike Singletaries, these old school guys who would have had to be carried off the field in a gurney before leaving the game on their own terms. But that's not even what happened. It turns out the NFL has a thing called medical staffs, and Coach Lovie Smith himself said Jay Cutler was not allowed to go back in the game with an MCL injury that takes about a month to recover from. But it didn't even matter. The damage was done. Just the image of seeing Jay Cutler sitting on the bench in a warm coat while his team battled out there without him rubbed every Bears fan the wrong way, and this narrative about him not caring about football or his teammates at all unfortunately never left him again, and from here on out, the Jay Cutler era was all downhill. Before 2011, not only did they trade away Greg Olsen, who is clearly a terrible tight end and has no potential, so, great move there, but the Bears had another massive management change, as George McCaskey, George Halas's grandson, became the official chairman of the Chicago Bears, replacing Michael. And George is a good dude by most people's account, but he's extremely hands-off. And even he himself has said that he's not a football guy. He's just like a fan. So, it seems like a great decision as per usual. And with that shakeup and the constant lateral movement of the front office, the Johnny Lujack curse came for more blood. And this time it went way, way too far. Jay Cutler and Matt Forte, the two most important pieces the Bears had on offense, both went down with season-ending injuries, so the offense already was fucking gutted, but the curse ended up snatching the career of the potential next Devin Hester in Johnny Knox, as he suffered one of the most gruesome injuries in NFL history, ending his career on the spot. And not only were the injuries at an all-time destructive level, but we got some usual Bears bullfuckery this season as well that I gotta mention because it's comedy, okay? They gave up 25 points to the Raiders in a loss while only giving up a single touchdown. A game that I was at, so that was pretty fun. And then 1 week later, Chris Conte slaps the ball out of Brian Urlacher's hands right to a Chiefs receiver for a touchdown on a Hail Mary, and the Bears would go on to lose that game, with that play being the only touchdown scored all game long. Like, what the fuck? Just when you think the Bears have hit the pain threshold, they find a way to shatter the scale and invent a whole new one, with 2012 being an even funnier season than 2010. So early on, the team was looking pretty great, but we've seen this before. They started out 7-1, and with the addition of All-Pro wide receiver Brandon Marshall, the offense was clicking, only for the team to suffer an absolutely historic collapse down the stretch, dropping 2 games in a row, both to division rivals in the Vikings and Packers. However, they still had a chance to make the playoffs. As long as the Vikings didn't somehow beat the Packers in the final week of the season, then they'd be... Well, that'll do it. The Bears' 2012 season was over. And the best part about this team, and what makes it so goddamn hilarious, is that forever the Bears have struggled to find defensive and offensive consistency. It was so rare for the Bears to have a good defense and a good offense, but in 2012, they had that. Not only was the offense very solid, but the defense, according to DVOA metrics, the 2012 Bears defense was one of the top 10 defensive units going back to 1985. And they missed the playoffs. All pros on offense, all pros on defense, and they missed the play. God, I love watching the Bears suffer, if you couldn't tell. And 2013 was another year, another vicious uppercut from the good old football gods. But before the year began, they started off by firing Lovie Smith after failing to get the job done, and hoped a Canadian football coach in Mark Trestman could change things up a bit, as the Bears were once again a very good offensive team, even better than they were last year, mainly because of the emergence of sophomore receiver Alshon Jeffrey to help take the pressure off of Brandon Marshall, and the Bears came into every Sunday with the second best offense in the league, averaging almost 28 points per game. But guess what? The defense was ass now. Yes, 1 year after being a top 10 unit damn near ever, they plummeted down the rankings because in just one season, they lost everyone. Brian Urlacher retired after he was offered just $2 million to stay. Julius Peppers joined the enemy, and Charles Tillman as well as Lance Briggs both suffered season-ending injuries, and injuries that basically ended their playing time with the Chicago Bears too. But hey, they still had a chance to make the playoffs in 2013. Going into a Week 16 game versus Chip Kelly's Eagles, the Bears had a chance... Alright then. Going into a Week 17 game versus Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers, the Bears...
Blitz! Rodgers gets out! Floats it! Cobb! Touchdown! Randall Cobb!
This is the way it is. This is the way it's been for almost 30 years, so why would it end now? The Bears blew their season again and lost in the most heartbreaking way possible on a walk-off Chris Conte blown coverage to the Green Bay Packers in Soldier Field. And you don't just brush something like that off and move on. That leaves a stain forever. And from 2014 through 2017, the Bears were decaying from within. 2014 was a wash after losing back-to-back games by 50 points with an offensive coordinator who allegedly punched a child over a lawn chair dispute, and they ended that season off by doing nothing in terms of the win column, but did give Jay Cutler a pretty hefty contract to keep him on the team through 2020. And the next couple of years were just wasted time. From 2015 through 2017, John Fox accumulated a record of 14-34 with a win percentage of 29%, but the two biggest takeaways during this time of Chicago Bears football, unless you're super into the sexual gratification you get from watching a 2-yard Jordan Howard run, then we should focus on the hiring of general manager Ryan Pace and when the Bears decided to cut Jay Cutler before the 2017 season. And they also whiffed horribly on Kevin White in 2015. I just needed to mention that. By the time Jay Cutler left the Bears, he was the Bears' all-time leader in pretty much every major passing category, and will probably hold a majority of those records for at least a few more seasons, but still, his play left a lot to be desired. People still say he was a little overrated, but from 2009 through 2015, he was third in the league in interceptions, right behind Drew Brees, which, Sounds like a knock on Drew until you realize that Cutler threw for almost 100 less touchdowns than Brees did during that same time span. But to focus more on 2017, the Bears' incompetent front office came back like 2016 LeBron and delivered an all-time masterclass of pure shit, because priority number one was still getting a quarterback. But luckily for them, Hall of Famers just don't become available in free agency every day, but this time one did, as the Chicago Bears signed Mike Glennon to a 3-year, $45 million deal to be the new franchise. But before Bears fans could finish their DIY nooses, without letting John Fox know what was going to happen in the draft, Ryan Pace and the Bears staff fell in love with North Carolina's Mitchell Trubisky. But there was only one issue. They were picking third, and this quarterback that was projected to go around 12th might not be available, even though everyone wanted them to just draft a hard hitter in Jamal Adams. But instead, the Bears decided they needed to guarantee that they got their guy and basically just traded away Fred Warner to the 49ers for a single spot difference and drafted Mitchell Trubisky. So this is a mess. Now you got Trubisky here, who's getting sucked off by the front office while Mike Glennon thought he was going to be the franchise, and now everyone's confused. So when 2017 began, Mike Glennon was given starting job, but when Mike Glennon started to play a lot like Mike Glennon, he was benched, and in came the old kisser of titties himself to prove he could be that guy for Chicago. But his play left a lot to be desired as a rookie, but he wasn't awful, and by year's end, Trubisky showed some flashes here and there. He had a ton of athleticism and finished the year as the top-rated rookie quarterback by PFF's grades, beating out CJ Beathard and Deshaun Kaiser. But by now, the Bears had built up the defense again. Long gone were Lance Briggs, Brian Urlacher, and Peanut Tillman, but a whole new crew was here to wreck things, led by Kyle Fuller, Eddie Jackson, Akeem Hicks, as well as 2018 rookie Roquan Smith. This defense was good, but they were missing one superstar, a true X-factor that demands a double team on every play, and luckily, a wild Gruden appeared, and upon his death, the Bears found themselves in possession of one Khalil Mack, a Hall of Fame lock and a true superstar, and just like that, the Bears were all in on 2018. With a new head coach in Matt Nagy and Vic Fangio calling the shots, the 2018 Bears were set to be a powerhouse, and in Week 1 versus the Green Bay Packers on Monday Night Football, they had a beautiful start to the season. They took a 20-0 lead, Aaron Rodgers got hurt, and Khalil Mack had one of the best debut performances ever, going for a forced fumble, a pick six, and a sack. But Aaron Rodgers is pretty good at football, and they lost that game. But the 2018 Bears were an elite football team, as they went 12-4 to end the season and ended the year on an absolute tear. And there were some high highs this season, too. For one thing, Trubisky was developing pretty nicely. Hell, he had arguably the best game of the entire season versus Tampa Bay when he threw for 500 yards and 6 touchdowns. And in Week 15, he played efficient football to outlast Aaron Rodgers and the Packers to clinch the NFC North. So now, it was wildcard time. A perfect test for Mitchell Trubisky to see if he could rise to the occasion as they took on an injury-riddled Eagles squad that had a losing record for most of the year and only made the playoffs because the Bears beat the Vikings in Week 17. So, all right, you let them in your house, you gotta deal with them, right, Chicago? Well, right away, the Bears played horribly down to competition and kept the Eagles in the game despite the fact that Nick Foles was doing fuck all nothing with the ball. But neither was Trubisky. Early in the second, he had a chance to lead the team to a score, but instead, the drive stalled out, which led to a Cody Parkey field goal. St. Nick continued to gift some freebies to the Bears, and that combined with Trubisky's mastery of the 3-and-out eventually led us to this. After a touchdown each, the Bears found themselves up by 5 with minutes remaining in the fourth quarter. All that needed to be done to win a playoff game was for the best defense in football to stop a backup quarterback from going exactly the length of the field and scoring a touchdown. But hold on a second, because I'm not being fair here. Nick Foles isn't just a backup quarterback. He is the backup quarterback. And he came out there on the field, bricked out of his mind, and ready to rumble. And of all the people it could have been, Alshon Jeffrey hauled in a clutch third down conversion, and Golden Tate got a touchdown on fourth down to take the lead, and now Trubisky had to make something happen. Except he sort of didn't. Remember, this is a good team, so the defense stopped the 2-point conversion, Tariq Cohen had a good return, and Allen Robinson made a great play on the ball to set up a 43-yard field goal for the win. the best team the Bears have had quite possibly since 2006 or even the 80s had its fate rested on the foot of one man. So once again, Bears fans, talking to you out there, if there's any of you left out there, if you haven't gouged your eyes out at this point, now might be a good time to go outside, appreciate nature, take a good breath fresh of air, because, well, you know what's coming next. Do I even need to say it?
And he hits the upright again. That's impossible.
That's it. Yep, that's it right there. The end. The Bears have been tormented in the past, sure. They've had superstars taken from them. They've had injuries ruin legendary careers. They've had historic collapses and everything in between, but this is the worst of it all. Having maybe your most talented team ever snatched away like that to a significantly worse football team is just barbaric work by the football gods. And in that game versus the Eagles, Trubisky played like ass. He clearly was not going to be the franchise guy, and his stats don't look awful on paper because he didn't have any turnovers, but he should have had at least 2 picks easily. And going into 2019, everything regressed. The defense got worse, Trubisky got worse, Nagy got worse, and injuries continued to be the bane of the Bears' existence as Roquan Smith, Akeem Hicks, Danny Trevathan, and even more key pieces were all injured and missed the playoff push, with the Bears failing to make the postseason, finishing with an 8-8 record. And from there, this core was just slowly running out of gas. I mean, you get it at this point, right? Good defense plus quarterback equals hardcore relationship therapy for all Bears fans of a variety of ages. And 2020 is only worth mentioning because of the astounding Nickelodeon wildcard matchup the Bears found themselves in with Drew Brees' corpse, and after they got pulverized, Mitch Trubisky took home the coveted MVP award, which sadly, they took off his Pro Football Reference page, but for a damn minute there, he was the only one to have the MVP next to his name. So, all I'm saying is Tom Brady doesn't have an MVP. As we move on to 2021, though, the Bears' quarterback free agency moves have constantly been either delusional or useless. In 2020, they tried to carry over some Nick Foles magic to the team, but that failed horribly. And then, how many of you out there remember when in the free agency of 2021, the Bears had their eyes on 2 guys, Deshaun Watson and Russell Wilson, and after cutting ties with Trubisky, Ryan Pace had his eyes on the prize known as the Chef, and called up the Seahawks and offered, reportedly, some combination of these 2 players. Khalil Mack, Roquan Smith, Akeem Hicks, or Kyle Fuller. And that's not all. They then offered not 1, not 2, but 3 first-round picks, once again, for Russell Wilson. Well, okay then. Andy Dalton it is. Unironically, though, Andy Dalton might be better than both Russ and Deshaun Watson. But now the Bears, after striking out 3 times, turned to the 2021 NFL Draft and selected quarterback Justin Fields 11th overall after trading up with the Giants, and, well, I'm just going to spoil it for you. Justin Fields was not the savior for Chicago. A shocker, I know, but the Chicago Bears in 2021 were already so far from 2018, it was absurd. Eddie Jackson wasn't the same player. Khalil Mack battled injuries and left for LA a year later, while Akeem Hicks took off for Tampa Bay. And without the defense out there to make things easier on the offense, the Bears went 6-11, fired Matt Nagy, fired Ryan Pace, and moved on to another new crew. In came Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles to help lead the tank, and they did an exceptional job in year number 1, having a stretch of games where they found themselves sitting at an 0-10 record and traded away the best linebacker in football, Roquan Smith, to the Ravens. And at the end of 2022, it seemed like it was rock bottom for Chicago, except it wasn't. There was a glimmer of hope at the bottom of the well. As I've had to talk about this trade in damn near every video now, but as you know, the Chicago Bears completed one of the most impactful trades in NFL history already, trading away their 2023 pick to the Carolina Panthers in exchange for a true wide receiver 1 in DJ Moore, the number 9 overall pick, the Panthers' first overall pick in 2024, and a few more picks, completing one of the biggest robberies ever too, and, well, you all know what that 2024 pick became. After another underwhelming season where Justin Fields failed to show the potential to be a no-questions-asked franchise cornerstone, he was traded away to the Steelers for just a 6th-round pick, basically. And because the Panthers were the worst team in the entire NFL, the Chicago Bears held both the 1st and 9th overall picks in the draft, where they would select wide receiver Roma Dunze, and with the 1st overall pick, they took USC's Caleb Williams, hoping, praying, that he can finally be the one to end the Johnny Lujack curse. The Chicago Bears as an NFL franchise have been through a lot. Like, a lot. But even for all their moments of tragedy, they've had just as many moments of triumph damn near. Most NFL historians have the 1985 Bears ranked as at least a top 5 team ever, no questions asked, and they've also had legendary figures like Brian Urlacher, Mike Ditka, Walter Payton, George Halas, but none of them were quarterbacks. None. And in their entire organization's existence, their best quarterback ever is probably still Sid Luckman, who played in the 40s, or Jay Cutler. So, I mean, what I'm trying to say here is the expectations on a franchise level are historically low. All Caleb Williams has to do out there is be solid for 4 seasons, and he'll probably be able to pass Mitchell Trubisky on the Bears' all-time passing list, who's literally 5th. So maybe, just maybe, the Chicago Bears have found themselves their first franchise quarterback in 75 years, and the misery of the Chicago Bears can finally end. Anyways, if you like this video, then, that means a lot because this took a lot of work, then if you could subscribe, that'd be pretty nice. And also, if you did like this video, may I recommend watching this video I did a few weeks back on the Carolina Panthers and how they got into this horrible position they're in today. It's pretty good, trust me. And also, thanks to all my Patrons for pledging $1. It truly does mean a lot. But anyways, until next time.